So this topic of competition, at least for me, comes back to or boils down to lack and how much lack I have within me about what I learned about resources and security and stuff, and how much there is out there for me as my little itty bitty self. And uh, and I called this competition because sometimes what happens to me is that I'm good with my work, I'm doing my thing, I'm putting myself out there, I'm really liking how it's going, and then I enter an arena where there's a lot of other people who maybe sound like me, talk like me, play the game in a certain way, like or unlike me. And I start to feel this sense of almost like being crowded in upon. Like, how am I going to assert myself uniquely? How am I going to assert myself competitively? Like, in other words, if it's just me, there's just me, and I've got my own little domain. As soon as I start trying to get bigger, there's a bigger world with bigger things that could devour me and bigger things that can make me feel small. And so then once I enter one of those types of arenas, whether it's social media, whether it's a job, a company, a team, a party, whatever, I then have to feel a sense maybe of insecurity, which lends itself to a competitiveness that's like, oh, how am I going to be like bigger or sound better or differentiate myself? And it's funny because there are certain arenas in my life, some community groups I belong to, other types of groups, family, community stuff, where I do have my own space and I'm just being myself. So why is it that when I go into a more strange or bigger space, I tend to feel more competitive, or I tend to feel smaller, or I tend to have this idea, which I believe is delusional, that somehow because this space is bigger and less known to me, I'm not as comfortable being myself? Or that, worse yet, there's this sense that I have to not be myself in order to compete or get ahead. And I look back to my experience competing as an athlete, and I think, it's really sort of funny. I started competing as an athlete when I had zero athletic experience. As a matter of fact, I became a competitive rower when I had effectively just quit smoking cigarettes 3 months before. So I'd never run. I had never done anything athletic regularly. And, the rowing training was extremely disciplined and not easy. And I was much more overweight at the time. I was much more deconditioned, and my lungs clearly were not healthy. But I remember that the most important part of the competition was that I found a group to belong to that was small, and we competed together. So there was a sense of like security and togetherness and commonality, and we were all getting up for the same reason and doing the same thing. And it's interesting because as I'm talking this through, I'm realizing that that's the key. That really the key to competition is it's not just about winning, or the key to like getting or being successful isn't just about getting money. It's the sense of like security that I get by being a part of something that matters. When I rode with these other women, I was a part of something that mattered, and then we competed together, and then we won. And same thing in these communities that I am, quote unquote, like more integrated with and more popular and more capable of being myself. I go in as myself and I'm warmly welcomed, and I become a part of because I feel comfortable as myself. And then we can become something bigger or do something bigger together because there's that sense of being together and doing it together, and I'm a part of. But I think this is the fear, right? Like there are still places that are bigger or unknown to me out there, and social media can tend to be one of them. I don't know why Facebook doesn't bother me, but Instagram makes me a little bit more like, ugh, on that competitive side of things, probably because it's newer, and also because what happens for me is when I go into a new place and I see a lot of people doing the same things and saying the same things and posting the same things, I get turned off because it just feels like this mass corroboration of like communication that's sometimes just like vapid. And so I have to continue to dispel my limiting ideas and my opinions and my judgments, and continue to show up to try and find and build the kind of community I seek, right? Which is, I do that by being myself, and I find my people, my niche, my tribe, and then I feel more comfortable being myself, and then I succeed as is warranted by the powers that be. Right? And with that comes money, and with that comes any kind of other prestige or privilege that I might want to pursue. But fundamentally, I'm okay. I find myself, I bring myself, I find the security of a small group that accepts me, and from there things grow. So the competition that I'm feeling is really like a little bit false, and I feel like it's just something that comes from my ego that I'm trying to understand. So Anyway, that's about all I have to say about that today. Thanks for hanging out and spending some time with me. I hope you'll have a really good day.